I woke up that morning feeling like I needed to take control of something, anything, in my life. My name's Caleb Monroe, 32 years old, a systems analyst who's pretty good at fixing code, but not so great at fixing the mess I sometimes call my daily routine. I'd been grinding away at work, staring at screens for hours, and hadn't done a single thing for myself in weeks. So, I decided today was the day for a quick trim at the barber shop down the street. Nothing fancy, just enough to feel like a new man. The air was crisp as I walked, my breath puffing out in little clouds, and I felt lighter already, like a good haircut could somehow reset my whole outlook. The shop smelled like aftershave and leather, and the barber, Tony, gave me a clean fade that made me nod at my reflection with a rare bit of approval. I tipped him extra and stepped back out into the cold, ready to head home and maybe tackle some overdue emails. That's when everything went wrong. I wasn't paying attention. My fault, I'll admit it. The sidewalk had a patch of ice I didn't see, slick as glass under a thin dusting of snow. One step, and my left leg slid out from under me. I tried to catch myself, but my weight came down wrong, and I hit the ground hard. A sharp, searing pain shot through my shin, like someone had driven a spike through it. I lay there for a second, stunned, the cold seeping into my jacket as a couple of passers-by stopped to check on me. "You okay, man?" one of them asked, but I could barely answer through the throbbing in my leg. Someone called an ambulance, and before I knew it, I was in the ER, staring at a fluorescent ceiling while a nurse prepped me for x-rays. The doctor came back with bad news, a clean tibia fracture. "You're looking at 6 to 8 weeks in a cast," he said, scribbling something on a chart. "No weight on it for now. Crutches, painkillers, and rest." I nodded, still processing, as they fitted me with a heavy plaster cast that went from my ankle to just below my knee. By the time they wheeled me out, I was exhausted, my head foggy from the meds they'd given me. I pulled out my phone to call Amanda, my wife. We'd been married 5 years, and though things weren't perfect, I figured she'd at least want to know I was hurt. "Hey," I said when she picked up, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. "I fell. Broke my leg. I'm at the hospital, just got a cast." There was a pause. Then her voice came through, clipped and distracted. "Oh, that's bad. You okay to get home?" I frowned, shifting the phone against my ear. "Yeah, I'll manage. Just letting you know." She made a vague sound, like she was only half listening. "Okay. Well, I'm helping my sister plan a trip right now. So, let me know if you need anything." That was it. "No, I'll come get you." Or "Are you in pain?" Just a quick dismissal, like I'd told her I'd spilled coffee on my shirt. I hung up, staring at the phone for a moment, a knot forming in my chest. I should have seen it then, the first red flag waving right in front of me, but I was too tired, too sore to think straight. A cab got me home, and I hobbled up to our apartment, the crutches digging into my armpits with every step. The place was quiet, Amanda still out, probably at her sister's place across town. I sank onto the couch, propping my cast on a pillow, and looked around at the familiar clutter, her magazines on the coffee table, my work laptop on the counter, dishes piled in the sink. It felt like any other day, except for the heavy weight on my leg and the dull ache that wouldn't quit. I popped one of the painkillers, washing it down with water from a bottle I'd left on the side table. My mind wandered as the meds kicked in, softening the edges of the pain. I thought about work, how I'd have to call my boss tomorrow and explain I'd be out for a while. I thought about the barbershop, how good it felt to do something simple for myself. And I thought about Amanda's voice on the phone, the way it carried that familiar tone, like I was an inconvenience she hadn't planned for. I told myself it was nothing, that she was just busy, that we'd talk when she got home. But deep down, something didn't sit right. I closed my eyes, the hum of the radiator filling the silence, and tried to focus on the fact that I was home, safe, and patched up. The cast felt like a prison, trapping me in place, but I figured I'd get used to it. I had no idea how much worse things were about to get, how that one fall would crack open more than just my leg. For now, I just leaned back, letting the painkillers pull me into a hazy sleep, hoping tomorrow would bring a little clarity, or at least a little less pain. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the living room window, my leg throbbing like it had its own heartbeat. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, still in yesterday's clothes, the cast heavy and awkward against the cushions. The painkillers had worn off, leaving a dull ache that made me wince as I shifted to sit up. The apartment was quiet, but I could hear Amanda in the kitchen, the clink of dishes and the soft shuffle of her slippers on the tile. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the fog in my head, and grabbed my crutches from where they'd fallen beside the couch. Hobbling toward the kitchen, I felt like a stranger in my own home, every step a reminder of how useless I was right now. Amanda was at the counter, pouring coffee into a mug, her back to me. She didn't turn around when I came in, just kept stirring sugar into her drink like it was the most important task of the day. "Morning," I said, my voice rough from sleep. She glanced over her shoulder, her expression neutral, like she was sizing me up. "You look rough," she said, then turned back to her coffee. I forced a half smile, leaning against the doorway for support. "Yeah, well, broken leg'll do that." I waited for her to ask how I was feeling, maybe offer to grab me some breakfast, but she didn't. Instead, she took a sip from her mug and said, "So, Harper and Logan are leaving for the Bahamas. We're watching Mason." I blinked, caught off guard. Mason was her sister's kid, a 6-year-old with more energy than a tornado. "What?" I said, gripping the crutches tighter. "I can't even watch myself right now." She finally turned to face me, her eyes narrowing just enough to make me feel like I'd already lost the argument. "He's 6, not a baby," she said, her tone sharp. "Since you can't work, at least make yourself useful." The words hit like a punch I didn't see coming. Useful. Like I was some tool she could pull out of a drawer when it suited her. I stood there, my mouth half open, trying to process what she just said. My leg was screaming. I hadn't even had a chance to eat, and she was volunteering me to babysit? "Amanda," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, "I'm on crutches. I'm on painkillers. I can't chase a kid around." She rolled her eyes, setting her mug down with a little more force than necessary. "You're not chasing anyone. He'll be fine. You just keep an eye on him." She made it sound so simple, like I was making a big deal out of nothing. I wanted to argue, to tell her how unfair this was, but the look on her face stopped me. It was that look she got when she'd already made up her mind, when anything I said would just bounce off her like I was shouting at a brick wall. I hobbled over to the couch and sank down, my mind racing. Harper and Logan were always pulling stuff like this, dumping their responsibilities on us without asking. Last summer, they'd left Mason with us for a weekend so they could get away, and I'd spent 2 days cleaning up spilled juice and picking Legos out of the carpet. Amanda never seemed to mind, or maybe she just didn't care enough to say no. But this was different. I wasn't in any shape to handle a kid, and she knew it. I stared at the cast on my leg, the plaster already smudged with a bit of dirt from yesterday's cab ride. My stomach growled, but the thought of getting back up to rummage through the fridge felt like climbing a mountain. Amanda walked past me, her phone in hand, already texting someone. "When are they dropping him off?" I asked, hoping maybe I had a few days to prepare. "Tomorrow," she said without looking up. "They're flying out in the evening." Tomorrow. Less than 24 hours to figure out how I was supposed to manage this. I opened my mouth to protest again, but she was already heading toward the bedroom, her voice trailing behind her. "You'll figure it out. You always do." The door clicked shut, and I was alone again, the silence settling over me like a weight. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and tried to picture how this was going to work. Me, barely able to move, keeping up with a kid who thought quiet was just a suggestion. I thought about calling Harper myself, telling her to find someone else, but I knew how that'd go. She'd cry to Amanda, and I'd end up looking like the bad guy. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I reached for it, wincing as the movement tugged at my leg. It was a text from my coworker Mateo, asking how I was holding up after the fall. I typed back a quick, "hanging in there," too tired to get into the details. At least someone cared enough to check in. I set the phone down and looked around the apartment, the familiar mess of it all, the throw blanket crumpled on the armchair, Amanda's sneakers by the door, a stack of bills I hadn't opened yet. It felt like the walls were closing in, like I was trapped in more than just a cast. I told myself I'd talk to Amanda again tonight, make her see reason. Maybe if I explained how much pain I was in, how hard it was to even get to the bathroom without feeling like I'd run a marathon, she'd listen. But deep down, I knew better. That word, useful, kept echoing in my head, twisting like a knife. I wasn't a husband to her right now. I was an obligation, a box to check off. I grabbed my crutches and pushed myself up, ignoring the ache in my arms. I'd get through today, one step at a time. Tomorrow could wait. For now, I just needed to eat something, take another painkiller, and try not to think about how much heavier this was all starting to feel. I woke up the next day with a headache that matched the throbbing in my leg, the kind of pain that makes you wonder if you'll ever feel normal again. The apartment was too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath before something bad happens. I'd spent most of last night staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to talk Amanda out of this babysitting nonsense. I'd even rehearsed a speech in my head, calm, reasonable, laying out why I couldn't handle her sister's kid right now. But when I tried to bring it up over dinner, she'd cut me off with a wave of her hand and said, "We're not doing this again." So here I was, propped up on the couch with a cup of lukewarm coffee, my crutches leaning against the armrest like silent jailers. Amanda was already up, moving around the bedroom with purpose, her footsteps sharp against the hardwood. I took a deep breath and called out, "Can we talk about this? Please." She poked her head out, her expression a mix of annoyance and impatience. "Talk about what?" she said, like I was wasting her time. I gripped my coffee mug a little tighter, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Mason, I'm serious. I can't do this. Not with my leg like this. I can barely get to the kitchen without falling over." She stepped into the living room, arms crossed, and leaned against the wall. "You're making it sound like he's a wild animal. He's a kid. Just put on a movie or something. You don't have to run a marathon." I shook my head, frustration bubbling up. "It's not about movies. It's about me not being able to move properly. What if he gets hurt? What if I get hurt trying to keep up with him? I'm on painkillers, for God's sake." Her eyes narrowed, and for a second, I thought she might actually listen. But then she said, "You're not the only one with problems, okay? I'm dealing with stuff too. Harper needs this trip, and I'm not going to tell her no because you can't handle a couple weeks." A couple weeks. The words landed like a brick. I opened my mouth to argue, to say that this wasn't about me handling anything. It was about basic fairness, but she was already walking away, her phone buzzing in her hand. "I'm late," she said over her shoulder. "We'll figure it out when I get back." The door slammed shut behind her, and I was alone again, the coffee in my mug going cold. I sat there for a long time, staring at the cast on my leg, the plaster scratched and smudged from just 2 days of use. My mind kept replaying her words, "You're not the only one with problems." Like my broken leg was just an inconvenience she had to work around. I tried to focus on something else, maybe call work, check my emails, but every thought circled back to the fact that I was about to be stuck with a 6-year-old I didn't have the energy or ability to manage. I told myself I'd say no when Harper showed up. I'd be firm, tell her to find someone else. But even as I thought it, I knew how it'd go. Harper would cry, Logan would give me that disappointed look, and Amanda would make it my fault somehow. The day dragged on, each hour heavier than the last. I managed to hobble to the kitchen for a sandwich, nearly dropping the plate when my crutch slipped on the tile. By afternoon, my leg was screaming, and I had to take another painkiller, the bottle sitting on the counter like a grim reminder of my limits. I was just settling back onto the couch, trying to distract myself with some mindless TV, when the doorbell rang. My stomach dropped. I knew who it was before I even got up. Getting to the door was a nightmare. Every step felt like a gamble, my crutches wobbling on the carpet. When I finally opened it, there they were, Harper and Logan, with Mason standing between them, clutching a backpack that looked bigger than he was. Harper's face was all smiles, like she was dropping off a gift instead of a responsibility. "Hey," she said, too cheerful. "Thanks so much for this. We really appreciate it." I stood there, one hand on the doorframe, trying to find the words I'd practiced in my head. "Look," I started, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. "I'm not really in any shape to," but Logan cut me off, clapping a hand on Mason's shoulder. "We'll be back in 3 weeks, he said, like it was already settled. "Thanks, man. You're a lifesaver." Before I could say another word, they were turning away, heading back to their car parked out front. Mason looked up at me, his eyes wide and curious, like he was waiting for me to tell him what to do. I glanced back at the street, hoping maybe they'd turn around, realized this was a mistake. But the car door slammed, and they were gone. I looked down at the kid, my heart sinking. "Come on in," I muttered, stepping aside so he could shuffle past me. I closed the door and hobbled back to the couch, my mind racing. Amanda wasn't even here. She'd left me to deal with this alone. I heard her voice from the kitchen, faint but unmistakable. "Oh, good. He's here," she called out, like she'd been expecting this all along. I turned to see her leaning against the counter, sipping from a water bottle, her face completely unbothered. "They already booked the trip," she said with a shrug. "What do you want me to do?" I stared at her, my jaw tight, a dozen things I wanted to say stuck in my throat. What did I want her to do? How about stand up for me, for us, for the fact that I was barely holding it together? But I didn't say any of it. I just looked away, my eyes landing on Mason, who was already digging through his backpack, pulling out a toy truck and making engine noises. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of this, with a leg I could barely move and a wife who didn't seem to care. I sank back onto the couch, the weight of it all pressing down on me, and wondered how I was supposed to survive this without losing what little grip I had left. I woke up to the sound of something crashing in the living room, my heart lurching before my eyes even opened. It was Mason's second day here, and already I felt like I was living in a war zone. My leg ached as I fumbled for my crutches, the cast feeling heavier than ever, like it was trying to anchor me to the bed. I hobbled out to find the kid standing on the coffee table, a guilty look on his face, surrounded by a pile of books he'd knocked over. "I was building a fort," he said, like that explained everything. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "Okay, buddy, let's not climb on the furniture, all right?" He nodded, but I could tell he was already thinking about his next adventure. I glanced around the apartment, my stomach sinking at the chaos that had taken over in just one day. The walls had new streaks of crayon, bright red scribbles that looked like they'd been drawn with the focus of a hurricane. The couch cushions were on the floor, one of them torn at the seam, and my laptop charger was nowhere to be seen. I'd spent most of yesterday trying to keep him entertained, setting him up with cartoons and a bowl of snacks. But every time I turned my back, he found a new way to turn my home into a playground. My leg wasn't helping. Every step on those crutches felt like a test I was failing, my arms sore from holding my weight, my shin throbbing with every movement. I'd barely slept, too busy worrying about what he might get into next. I sank onto the couch, rubbing my temples, and tried to figure out how I was going to survive 3 weeks of this. Amanda had barely been around. She'd left early yesterday, saying she had errands, and didn't come back until late, slipping into bed without a word. I'd hoped maybe she'd see the mess this morning and step in, but she was already in the kitchen, humming to herself like nothing was wrong. I called out to her, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. "Hey, can you come here for a sec?" She appeared in the doorway, a mug of tea in her hand, her expression impatient. "What's up?" she said, glancing at Mason, who was now pushing his toy truck across the floor, making loud vroom noises. I gestured at the walls, the books, the general disaster. I can't keep up with him. He's wrecking the place, and I'm barely mobile." She frowned, but it wasn't the kind of frown that said she understood. It was more like I was annoying her. "You should have hidden things better," she said, taking a sip of her tea. "And maybe don't be so dramatic. He's just being a kid." I stared at her, my jaw tightening. Hidden things better? Like I was supposed to predict he'd turn my living room into an art gallery? "Amanda," I said, trying to keep my tone even, "I'm not being dramatic. I'm in pain. I can't chase him around, and I shouldn't have to." She shrugged, already turning back toward the kitchen. "I'm heading to my parents' place tonight," she said over her shoulder. "They need help packing for their trip. You've got this." I opened my mouth to argue, but she was gone, the sound of her grabbing her keys echoing through the apartment. A moment later, the front door clicked shut, and I was alone with Mason again. My head pounded, a mix of frustration and exhaustion that made me want to scream. I looked over at the kid, who was now banging his truck against the leg of the coffee table, each hit sending a jolt through my already frayed nerves. I needed to check my medication. I hadn't taken a painkiller yet today, and the bottle was still on the counter where I'd left it. Hobbling to the kitchen felt like a mile, my crutches slipping slightly on the tile. When I got there, the bottle wasn't where I thought it was. I checked the counter, the sink, even the fridge by some desperate instinct. Nothing. Panic started creeping in, my chest tightening as I scanned tea. "Mason," I called, trying to sound calm, "did you see a little orange bottle anywhere?" He looked up from his truck, his face blank. "The one with the power pills?" My stomach dropped. "Power pills," I said, hobbling back to the living room as fast as I could. "Where'd you see those?" He pointed to the couch, where one of the cushions was flipped over. I leaned down, wincing as my leg protested, and found the bottle wedged between the cushions, the cap still on. Thank God. I grabbed it, my hands shaking, and checked inside. None of the pills were missing, but the thought of what could have happened made my blood run cold. "These aren't toys," I said, holding the bottle up so he could see. "You don't touch these, okay? Ever." He nodded, but I wasn't sure he really got it. I shoved the bottle into my pocket, deciding I'd keep it on me from now on. My mind was racing, a mix of relief and anger, at Mason, at Amanda, at myself for not seeing this coming. I sank back onto the couch, my legs screaming for a break, and tried to focus. I needed a plan, Something to keep this kid occupied that didn't involve destroying my home or putting either of us in danger. I set him up with some paper and a couple of pencils, non-toxic ones I'd found in a drawer, hoping he'd stick to drawing for a while. For about 10 minutes, it worked, but then he started tearing the paper into strips to make roads for his truck. I didn't have the energy to stop him. My phone buzzed on the side table, and I grabbed it, hoping maybe it was Amanda saying she'd changed her mind, that she was coming back to help. It was just a text from my boss, asking how I was doing and if I'd be up for some remote work soon. I typed back a vague reply, promising to check in tomorrow. The idea of work felt like a lifeline, something normal I could hold on to, but even that seemed out of reach right now. I looked at Mason, at the crayon marks on my walls, at the empty space where Amanda's support should have been, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about a broken leg anymore. It was about being left to drown while everyone else acted like I was supposed to swim. I closed my eyes, the weight of it all pressing down, and told myself I just had to get through today. Tomorrow, I'd figure out how to push back, or at least how to survive. By the third day with Mason, I was done. Done with the chaos, done with the excuses, done with feeling like I was carrying the weight of everyone else's choices on my broken leg. I woke up to a sticky mess in the hallway, the kind of mess that only a kid with no supervision could create. Mason had gotten into the kitchen overnight and decided to pour an entire gallon of orange juice into the heating vent to see what would happen. The apartment smelled like a citrus factory, and the floor was tacky under my crutches, each step a reminder of how far things had spiraled. My leg throbbed worse than usual, the pain cutting through the haze of my morning painkiller, and I hadn't slept more than a couple hours because I'd stayed up late trying to keep him from breaking anything else. I looked at the kid, who was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, playing with his toy truck like nothing was wrong, and felt a surge of anger, not at him, not really, but at the situation, at Amanda, at her sister and her husband who thought they could just dump their kid and run. I hobbled to the couch, my arms aching from the crutches, and sank down, trying to breathe through the frustration. The apartment was a disaster. Crayon marks on the walls, cushions scattered, dishes piling up because I couldn't stand long enough to wash them. I'd been trying to keep things together, setting Mason up with puzzles or videos, but he was 6-year-olds don't sit still, and I wasn't in any shape to keep up. Amanda hadn't come home last night, texting me at midnight that she was staying at her parents' to help with their packing. I'd stared at that message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, wanting to type something sharp, something that would make her see how unfair this was. But I didn't. I just put the phone down and went back to listening for any sign that Mason was getting into trouble. Now, staring at the juice-soaked vent, I knew I couldn't do this anymore. I grabbed my phone and called Amanda, my hand shaking as I waited for her to pick up. When she did, her voice was clipped, like I was interrupting something important. "What is it?" she said. I didn't bother with small talk. Mason poured a gallon of juice into the heating vent. "The apartment's a mess. My leg's killing me, and I can't do this. He needs to be picked up. Today." There was a long pause, and I could almost hear her rolling her eyes through the phone. "You're overreacting," she said. "It's juice. Clean it up." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles whitening. "Clean it up? I can barely walk. I'm not overreacting. I'm telling you I'm done. Either Harper picks him up, or I'm calling someone else to handle it." Her voice went cold. "Someone else? Like who? You're threatening your own family now." I closed my eyes, forcing myself to stay calm, to keep my voice low and steady. "No. I'm protecting myself from being taken advantage of. I'm hurt, Amanda. I need help, not more work." For a moment, she didn't say anything, and I thought maybe I'd gotten through to her. But then she laughed, a short, bitter sound that made my stomach twist. "You're being weak," she said. "Just deal with it. I'll be home tomorrow." The line went dead, and I sat there, staring at the phone, her words echoing in my head. Weak. Like asking for the bare minimum was some kind of failure. I set the phone down, my hands still trembling, and looked over at Mason, who was now humming to himself, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Something snapped. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet, like a thread finally giving way after being pulled too tight for too long. I wasn't going to let this keep happening. I wasn't going to be the one everyone leaned on while they walked away. I hobbled to the bedroom, ignoring the ache in my leg, and dug through the closet until I found an old toolbox I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a set of spare keys and a screwdriver. I'd had a second deadbolt installed a couple years ago after a break-in scare, but we never used it because Amanda said it was overkill. Now, It felt like the only thing standing between me and a little control over my own life. I made my way to the front door, moving slow, every step a fight against the pain and the crutches that kept slipping on the sticky floor. It took longer than it should have. My hands were clumsy, and I had to sit on the floor to get the angle right. But I managed to swap out the deadbolt's lock for a new one, the kind that needed a key Amanda didn't have. When I was done, I leaned against the wall, catching my breath, the screwdriver still in my hand. It wasn't much, but it felt like a line in the sand, a way to say I wasn't going to keep bending until I broke. I looked back at Mason, who was stacking couch cushions into a wobbly tower, and realized I still had to deal with him until someone took him off my hands. I called Harper's number next, my voice steady as I left a voicemail. "Hey, it's me. I can't watch Mason anymore. I'm injured, and it's not safe for either of us. You need to pick him up today, or I'm calling child services to figure this out." "I'm not kidding." I hung up, my heart pounding, but not with fear, with something closer to resolve. I didn't want to involve anyone official, but I needed them to know I wasn't bluffing. The rest of the day was a blur. Mason kept himself busy with his toys, and I let him, too tired to care about the mess anymore. I cleaned what I could, wiping down the vent with a rag I could reach from a chair, but the smell of juice lingered, a reminder of how deep I was in this. My leg hurt worse than ever, but I didn't take another painkiller, didn't trust myself to stay sharp with Mason around. By evening, no one had called back, and Amanda's texts had stopped after I ignored her last one asking if I'd calmed down yet. I sat on the couch, the new key in my pocket, and stared at the locked door. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something like power, not over anyone else, but over myself. I wasn't sure what would happen next, who'd show up, or what they'd say, but I knew one thing. I wasn't opening that door until I was ready. The apartment was quiet. Mason finally settling down with a coloring book I'd found in a drawer, and I let the silence wrap around me, heavy but not suffocating. Tomorrow would bring its own fights, but for now, I'd done what I could. I'd drawn my line, and I wasn't crossing it. The morning after I changed the locks, I woke up to a pounding on the front door that rattled the walls. My eyes snapped open, my legs stiff and aching from a night spent half sleeping on the couch, too wired to relax. The sound came again, louder, like someone was trying to break through, and I heard Amanda's voice, sharp and furious, cutting through the wood. "Open the door. What the hell is wrong with you?" I sat up, my heart racing, the new key still in my pocket where I'd left it. Mason was in the living room, sitting on the floor with his toy truck, looking up at the door with wide eyes. I grabbed my crutches, wincing as I pushed myself to my feet, and hobbled toward the noise. The pounding didn't stop. 3 more bangs, then another voice, older, gruffer. "You think you can just lock us out? Open this door right now." That was Harper's dad, his tone dripping with the kind of disapproval I'd heard too many times before. I paused, one hand on the wall for balance, and took a deep breath. I'd known this was coming, but knowing didn't make it any easier. I leaned closer to the door, keeping my voice steady. "I'm not opening it," I said, loud enough for them to hear. "I told you, I can't do this. Mason needs to go somewhere else." Amanda's response was immediate, her words spitting fire. "You're pathetic. You're really gonna pull this stunt over a kid? My family's standing out here, and you're acting like a coward." I closed my eyes, her words stinging more than I wanted to admit. Coward. Pathetic. They were meant to cut, to make me doubt myself, but I held on to the memory of yesterday. The juice in the vent, the crayon on the walls, the way I'd been left to drown while she walked away. I wasn't the one running from responsibility here. I opened my eyes and spoke again, slower this time. "I'm not a daycare. I'm recovering from a broken leg. You want to talk about family? Family doesn't dump their problems and leave someone else to clean up the mess." There was a beat of silence, then a new voice. Harper's mom, her tone softer but just as accusing. "You're a disgrace of a man, treating us like this. Mason's your nephew, not some stranger. How dare you?" I felt my jaw tighten, my fingers curling around the crutch handles. Nephew or not, Mason wasn't my kid, and I hadn't signed up for this. Not when I could barely take care of myself. I didn't answer her, didn't trust myself to keep my cool if I kept engaging. Instead, I hobbled back to the couch and sat down, my legs screaming for a break. The banging started again, Amanda yelling something I couldn't make out, but I tuned it out, focusing on Mason instead. He was watching me now, his truck forgotten, his small face pinched with worry. "Are they mad at me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, forcing a small smile. "No, buddy. They're just figuring things out. You're fine." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. I hated that he was caught in the middle of this, but I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay just to spare his feelings, or theirs. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I'd started documenting everything. The juice incident, the missing pills, the crayon on the walls. I added timestamps, photos I'd taken of the damage, even a screenshot of the repair estimate I'd gotten for the heating vent. $300 I didn't have to spare. Then I typed up a quick incident report, nothing fancy, just the facts, and emailed it to myself for safekeeping. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but having it felt like armor, something solid to lean on if this got uglier. The banging stopped eventually, replaced by the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. I waited, half expecting them to come back with a battering ram, but the building went quiet. My phone buzzed a few minutes later. Amanda, texting a string of messages that started with "You're unbelievable" and ended with "This isn't over." I didn't reply. Instead, I drafted a message to Harper and Logan, attaching the incident report and a photo of the vent damage. "This is why I can't keep Mason," I wrote. "I'm injured, and it's not safe. Pick him up today, or I'll have to take other steps." I hit send and set the phone down, my hands steady for the first time all morning. Mason was back to playing with his truck, quieter now, like he sensed the tension hadn't really gone away. I looked around the apartment, at the mess that still hadn't been cleaned, at the walls that felt like they were closing in. Part of me wanted to call Amanda back, to try reasoning with her one more time, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. She'd made her choice, her family, her sister's trip, her own convenience over me. I wasn't going to beg for her to see my side anymore. I taped a note to the outside of the door before locking it again, recovering. Not a daycare. Try again never. It wasn't subtle, but neither was leaving me to deal with this alone. The rest of the day passed in a strange kind of limbo. Mason stayed calm, maybe because he was picking up on my mood, and I let him watch cartoons while I tried to rest. My leg hurt worse than it had in days, but I didn't take another painkiller. Didn't want to dull my senses with Amanda's family circling like vultures. I kept my phone close, checking for replies, but nothing came. Not from Harper, not from Logan, not even from Amanda after her last text. The silence was louder than their shouting, heavy with the weight of what I'd done. I'd drawn a line, and they weren't used to me holding it. By evening, Mason was asleep on the couch, his truck clutched in one hand, and I sat there in the dark, the new key in my pocket like a talisman. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. More yelling, more demands, maybe even someone trying to force their way in. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, even with my leg busted and my life falling apart. I'd said no, and I'd meant it. That had to count for something. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let the quiet settle over me. Not peaceful, but close enough for now. Whatever came next, I'd face it on my terms, not theirs. The days after the lockout felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the next explosion, but the apartment stayed quiet. No banging, no yelling, just the hum of the radiator and Mason's occasional chatter as he played with his toys. I'd woken up that morning expecting another fight, my leg stiff and sore from sleeping at an odd angle to keep it elevated. But the hallway outside was empty, the note I'd taped to the door still there, untouched. I hobbled to the couch, crutches digging into my armpits, and checked my phone. No new messages from Amanda or her family, just a string of notifications from work and a text from my coworker Mateo that made me pause. "Heard you're laid up," it read. "Need anything? Food, beer, whatever." I stared at it for a minute, the simple offer catching me off guard. I hadn't told anyone at work about the mess with Mason or Amanda. I just said I was on medical leave, but here was Mateo, reaching out like it was no big deal. I typed back, "Appreciate it. Maybe some groceries if you're passing by." I hit send before I could overthink it, then set the phone down, feeling a flicker of something I hadn't in a while, gratitude, maybe, or just relief that someone wasn't asking me to carry their load. Mason was coloring on some paper I'd given him, his tongue sticking out as he focused on a lopsided drawing of a car. I'd called Harper again yesterday, left another voicemail saying they needed to pick him up, but still no response. I wasn't sure what I'd do if they didn't show soon. I couldn't keep him here forever, not like this. But for now, I was managing, keeping him fed and entertained while I tried to keep my own head above water. The apartment looked better than it had, though the crayon marks on the walls were still there, stubborn smudges I couldn't scrub off without standing too long. My leg was a constant reminder of my limits, aching every time I moved. But I was getting better at navigating with the crutches, finding ways to balance while I made coffee or heated up leftovers. Around noon, the doorbell rang, and I tensed, half expecting Amanda or her parents to start another scene. I hobbled over, peering through the peephole, and saw Mateo standing there, holding a couple of grocery bags, with Darren, another guy from work, behind him carrying a six-pack of soda. I opened the door, the new key turning smoothly in the lock, and managed to smile. "Didn't expect a whole delivery crew," I said, stepping aside to let them in. Mateo grinned, setting the bags on the counter. "Yeah, well, Darren was free, and we figured you're probably sick of takeout." Darren nodded at Mason, who was watching them curiously from the couch. "Who's the kid?" he asked, not prying, just wondering. "My wife's nephew," I said, keeping it vague. "Long story." They didn't push, which I appreciated more than I could say. They stayed for a bit, helping me unpack the groceries, bread, milk, some fruit, even a pack of my favorite chips I hadn't asked for. Mateo noticed the crayon on the walls and laughed. "Looks like my place when my niece visits," he said, then grabbed a sponge from the sink and started scrubbing without me asking. Darren took out the trash, which had been piling up because I couldn't carry it to the dumpster on crutches. It wasn't much, just small things, but it felt like they lifted a boulder off my chest. Later that afternoon, my neighbor, Miss Klein, knocked on the door, holding a foil-covered dish that smelled like lasagna. She was in her 60s, lived alone across the hall, and always waved when we passed in the stairwell. "Thought you might need a home-cooked meal," she said, her eyes flicking to my cast. "Heard you've had a rough week." I took the dish, the warmth seeping through the foil into my hands. "You didn't have to do that," I said, my voice thicker than I expected. She waved me off. "Nonsense. You take care of yourself, all right?" I nodded, thanking her again as she headed back to her place. I set the lasagna on the counter, staring at it like it was proof the world wasn't all demands and disappointment. That evening, my phone buzzed with a delivery notification, a care package from Sasha, an old college buddy I hadn't seen in years. Inside were some books, a bag of coffee beans, and a handwritten note. "Heard about the leg. Hang in there, man." I didn't even know how he'd found out, probably through mutual friends on social media, but the gesture hit me hard, a reminder of connections I'd let slip over the years. Meanwhile, Amanda's family was lighting up Facebook with vague posts about selfish in-laws and people who turn their backs on family. I saw them because I hadn't blocked anyone yet, though I was tempted. The posts were careful not to name me, but I knew who they were aimed at. Part of me wanted to fire back, to lay out everything, the juice in the vent, the missing pills, the way I'd been left to handle it all with a broken leg. But I didn't. I closed the app and put my phone face down, letting the silence do the talking. It burned louder than any reply I could have written. Mason ate the lasagna like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted, and for a few minutes, things felt almost normal. I watched him, wondering what was going through his head, stuck here with me while his parents were off sipping cocktails on a beach. He didn't deserve this mess any more than I did, but I couldn't fix that, not yet. After he went to sleep, I sat on the couch, the apartment quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge. My leg was propped up, the cast scratched and worn, but I felt steadier than I had in days. Mateo, Darren, Miss Klein, Sasha, they'd shown up, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They didn't ask for anything, didn't expect me to be useful or prove myself. They just saw I was struggling and stepped in. It wasn't a fix for everything. Harper still hadn't called. Amanda was still gone, and the weight of it all still pressed down, but it was enough to keep me going. I looked at the crayon marks, the dishes I'd managed to wash, the groceries neatly packed away, and felt a small spark of hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. Maybe the real ones, the ones who mattered, were the ones showing up now, not the ones screaming about loyalty while leaving me to sink. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and let that thought settle, carrying me through the night with a little less weight than before. Waking up on the third week of my recovery felt different, like the air in the apartment had shifted while I slept. My leg still ached, the cast a heavy reminder of how far I had to go, but the pain wasn't as sharp anymore, more of a dull hum I could push through. I sat up on the couch, where I'd been sleeping to keep an eye on Mason, and noticed the quiet, not the tense kind that comes before a fight, but something softer, almost peaceful. The kid was still asleep, curled up on an air mattress I'd set up in the corner, his toy truck tucked under one arm. I hobbled to the kitchen, leaning on my crutches, and started the coffee maker, the familiar gurgle grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. The apartment wasn't perfect, crayon marks lingered on the walls, and the faint smell of orange juice still clung to the heating vent. But it was mine again, at least for now. Harper and Logan hadn't called back, which wasn't a surprise, but it stung all the same. I left one more voicemail yesterday, calm but firm, saying Mason needed to be picked up by the end of the week or I'd have to figure out another solution. I didn't want to involve anyone official, it wasn't Mason's fault, but I couldn't keep living like this, balancing a kid and a busted leg while Amanda acted like I didn't exist. She hadn't texted since the lockout, and I hadn't reached out either, letting the silence between us grow like a wall I wasn't ready to climb. I poured my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, propping my leg on a chair. The cast was scratched and smudged, but I could move a little easier now, my arms stronger from weeks of crutches. I'd started physical therapy last week, just some basic exercises with a guy named Joel who didn't sugarcoat things. "You're healing faster than most," he'd said at our last session, adjusting my brace. "Probably because you're so damn stubborn about getting your life back." He wasn't wrong. Every stretch, every wobbly step, felt like a fight to reclaim something, my space, my time, maybe even myself. I sipped my coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest, and thought about how far I'd come in just a few weeks. The chaos of Mason's first days here felt like a lifetime ago, replaced by a routine that wasn't perfect but worked. I'd set up a corner for him with coloring books and puzzles, things he could do without turning the place upside down. He still had his moments. Yesterday, he'd spilled milk on the carpet trying to make a lake, but they were smaller, easier to handle now that I wasn't drowning in pain and frustration. Work had been a lifeline too. My boss had okayed some part-time remote tasks, mostly reviewing code and answering emails, things I could do from the couch with my leg propped up. It wasn't much, but it gave me a reason to get up, a way to feel like I was still part of the world outside these walls. I'd even started journaling again, something I hadn't done since high school when I thought I was going to be a writer someday. Just a few lines each night, scribbling thoughts in a cheap notebook I'd found in a drawer, how my leg felt, what Mason did that day, the way Amanda's absence left a hole I wasn't sure how to fill. It wasn't poetry, but it helped, like letting out a breath I'd been holding too long. I glanced at the clock, almost time for my next therapy session. I'd been looking forward to it, not just for the exercises, but for the way Joel talked, blunt and practical, like he'd seen guys like me pull through 100 times. I finished my coffee and hobbled to the sink, rinsing the mug with one hand while balancing on a crutch. The simple act felt like a victory, proof I was getting stronger, even if it was slow. Mason stirred in the living room, mumbling something in his sleep, and I paused, watching him for a moment. He was a good kid, just stuck in a mess he didn't make. I wondered what he'd remember about this time, me hobbling around, the cartoons we watched, the way I'd tried to keep things steady for him even when I was falling apart. I hoped it wasn't the fights, the yelling through the door, but I couldn't control that. I got him up and fed him breakfast, cereal, because it was easy, and we settled into our morning routine. He colored while I checked work emails, the apartment quiet except for the scratch of his pencils and the occasional ping of my laptop. Around noon, MS. Klein knocked with another dish, this time a chicken casserole that smelled like comfort itself. "You're looking better," she said, her eyes crinkling as she handed it over. I smiled, genuinely this time. "Feeling better too. Thanks for this." She waved me off, same as always, and I carried the dish inside, my crutch wobbling but holding steady. Therapy went well. Joel had me try a new exercise, shifting my weight without the crutches for a few seconds at a time. It hurt, but not as much as I'd expected, and when I managed a full minute without falling, he clapped me on the shoulder. "Keep this up. You'll be walking by next month," he said. I left the clinic feeling lighter, like I was carrying something new, a possibility, maybe, that things could get better. Back home, I heated up the casserole for dinner, and Mason ate 2 helpings, which felt like another small win. After he went to sleep, I pulled out my journal and wrote about the day, the therapy, the casserole, the way the apartment didn't feel like a prison anymore. I wrote about Amanda too, not with anger, but with a kind of distance, like I was starting to see her from the outside. She'd chosen her path, and I was choosing mine, even if I didn't know where it led yet. I closed the notebook and leaned back, my leg propped on a pillow, the cast catching the glow of the lamp. The quiet wrapped around me, not heavy like before but warm, like a blanket I'd chosen for myself. No screaming kids, no demands, just me, and a cup of decaf that didn't taste like resentment. I looked around, at the walls that were still mine despite the crayon, at the dishes I'd managed to wash, at the kids sleeping soundly across the room. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was close enough to keep me going, one careful step at a time, toward whatever came next. The night before Harper and Logan were due back, I was sitting on the couch, my leg propped up, the cast feeling more like an old friend than a burden now. Mason was asleep in the corner, his air mattress sagging slightly under his weight, a coloring book open beside him. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you think without drowning in your own head. I'd spent the day cleaning what I could, wiping down counters, stacking dishes, even scrubbing a few of those stubborn crayon marks off the walls with a sponge I could manage while sitting. My leg was healing, not fast but steady, and I could feel the difference in the way I moved, the way I didn't wince every time I shifted my weight. I'd been dreading this moment for weeks, the inevitable return of Amanda and her family, but now that it was here, I felt something else, calm, maybe, or at least a kind of resolve I hadn't had before. I'd spent too long letting their chaos dictate my life, and I wasn't going back to that. The doorbell rang around 7, sharp and sudden, cutting through the stillness. I knew it was her before I even got up. Nobody else would show up unannounced like that. I hobbled to the door, my crutches steady under me, and checked the peephole. Amanda stood there, arms crossed, her face set in a way that said she was ready for a fight. I took a deep breath, turned the new key in the lock, and opened the door just enough to see her clearly. She didn't move to come in, just stared at me like I was a stranger. "I hope you learned your lesson," she said, her voice low but sharp, like a blade she'd been sharpening for days. "About loyalty." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing, no anger, no hurt, just a quiet certainty that I was done playing her game. I didn't say anything at first, just reached for the manila envelope I'd left on the side table. I'd spent yesterday filling it out, signing the separation papers I'd printed from a template online. They weren't final, not yet, but they were a start, a way to draw a line I could stand behind. I held the envelope out to her, my hand steady. "Here," I said, my voice even. She frowned, taking it like it might bite her, and glanced at the label. Her eyes widened, just for a second, before she covered it with a scowl. "You're choosing this?" she asked, her voice rising, like she couldn't believe I'd dare. "After everything, you're just walking away?" I met her gaze, not flinching, not backing down. "I'm choosing peace," I said, and meant every word. She opened her mouth, probably to argue, to throw something back at me, but I didn't give her the chance. I stepped back, closed the door, and locked it, the click of the deadbolt louder than any shout. I stood there for a moment, waiting for her to bang on it, to scream, but there was nothing, just silence, heavy and final. I hobbled back to the couch and sat down, my heart pounding but not with fear. It was like I'd just cut a rope I'd been tangled in for years, and for the first time, I could breathe. The next morning, I woke up early, the apartment still quiet, Mason still asleep. I made coffee, moving carefully so I didn't wake him, and checked my phone. No texts from Amanda, no voicemails from Harper or Logan, just a message from Joel, my therapist, reminding me of our session tomorrow. I've been looking forward to it, not just for the exercises, but for the chance to talk about this. Everything that had happened, everything I was starting to see clearly. I spent the day keeping things steady for Mason, setting him up with breakfast and his puzzles, answering his questions about when his parents were coming back. Soon, I told him, hoping I wasn't lying. Around noon, I got a text from Harper, short and to the point. "We're back tonight." Picking him up at 6. No apology, no thanks, just the bare minimum, but I didn't care. It was enough. I started packing Mason's things, his backpack, his toys, the coloring books I'd bought to keep him busy. It felt strange, folding his little shirts, knowing he'd be gone soon, but it also felt right, like closing a chapter one hadn't meant to write. When 6 o'clock came, Harper showed up alone, her face tired but unreadable. She didn't say much, just nodded when I handed her Mason's bag and said, "Thanks for watching him." I didn't reply, just watched as she took his hand and led him out, the door closing softly behind them. The apartment felt bigger without him, emptier but not in a bad way. I sat back down, my leg propped up, and let the silence settle. That night, I did something I hadn't planned. I blocked Amanda's number, then Harper's, Logan's, her parents', every contact tied to that mess. It wasn't anger driving me, not anymore. It was clarity, like wiping a foggy window clean. I didn't need their voices in my head, their demands, their guilt trips. I needed space to figure out who I was without them. I pulled out my journal and wrote about it, the words coming easier than they had before. I wrote about the envelope, the way Amanda's face had changed when she saw it, the way I'd felt standing my ground. I wrote about Mason leaving, about the quiet that followed, about the way my leg didn't hurt as much as it used to. It wasn't a victory, not exactly, but it was mine, something I'd built, step by painful step. I closed the notebook and leaned back, the cast catching the light from the lamp. The apartment smelled like coffee and clean dishes, no trace of orange juice or chaos. I thought about tomorrow, therapy, maybe a call to Mateo to thank him for the groceries, a few hours of work to keep my mind sharp. I thought about the weeks ahead, the possibility of moving forward without the weight of Amanda's expectations dragging me down. It wasn't going to be easy, separation papers were just a start, and there'd be fights, lawyers, maybe even days when I'd doubt myself. But sitting there, with the world shut out and my own choices in front of me, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Ready. I got up, hobbled to the kitchen, and poured myself another cup of coffee, decaf so I wouldn't be up all night. I stood by the window, looking out at the streetlights, the glow soft against the dark. The cast was still there, the pain still lingered, but they didn't define me, not anymore. I was starting to see a path, not clear but real, and for now, that was enough. I took a sip, the warmth steadying me, and let the night carry me forward, one moment at a time. 6 months later, I woke up to sunlight filtering through the blinds of my new apartment, a small place across town with a balcony that caught the sunset just right. My leg was healed now, the cast long gone, replaced by a faint scar and a slight stiffness I only noticed on cold mornings. I stretched, feeling the pull of muscles that had grown stronger through months of therapy and careful steps, and got out of bed without the dread that used to weigh me down. The air smelled like fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen, a routine I'd come to love, simple, mine, free of anyone else's chaos. I was 32, still a systems analyst, but I felt like a different man, one who'd learned to carry himself instead of everyone else's baggage. I poured a cup of coffee and stepped onto the balcony, the city waking up below me, all honking cars and early commuters. It was a far cry from the old apartment, with its crayon-marked walls and sticky floors, and I was glad for it. The move had been a hassle, packing boxes with one good leg, sorting through years of stuff I didn't need, but it was worth it to leave behind the memories of Amanda, her family, and the mess they'd made of my life. I sipped my coffee, the mug warm in my hands, and thought about how I'd gotten here, one choice at a time, each one building on the last. The separation papers had been the start, a line I'd drawn when I handed them to Amanda that night. She'd fought it at first, texting me for weeks after I blocked her number, leaving voicemails I deleted without listening. I didn't hate her, not then, not now, but I couldn't live with someone who saw me as a tool to be used, not a partner. The divorce wasn't final yet. There were still lawyers and paperwork to deal with, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. It was just another step, like therapy or moving, something to keep me moving forward. I'd started hiking again last month, short trails at first, testing my leg on uneven ground. The first time I made it to a lookout point, sweating and breathing hard, I stood there, looking out at the hills, and felt something break open inside me, not pain, but freedom, like I'd finally set down a load I hadn't realized I was carrying. I went back every weekend now, sometimes alone, sometimes with Mateo or Darren, who'd become more than just co-workers after showing up with groceries that day. They didn't know the whole story. Nobody did, not even Joel, but they didn't need to. They were there, steady, the kind of friends you don't have to explain yourself to. I joined a chess club too, a whim that turned into a highlight of my week. It met at a community center downtown, a mix of old guys who'd been playing for decades and younger folks like me, looking for something to anchor them. I wasn't great, lost more games than I won, but I loved the focus, the way each move forced me to think ahead, to see the board as it could be, not just as it was. It reminded me of my life now, planning for what came next instead of reacting to someone else's mess. I'd even started dating again, something I hadn't thought I'd be ready for so soon. Her name was Noelle, a teacher I met at the coffee shop near my new place. She'd laughed at my terrible attempt at a joke about decaf, something about it being coffee's sad cousin, and we'd ended up talking for an hour, the kind of conversation that feels easy, like you've known someone longer than you have. She asked about my day, listened when I answered, and didn't push when I skirted around the heavier stuff. Last week, we'd gone for a walk in the park, her teasing me about my hiker swagger, and I'd caught myself smiling, really smiling, not because I had to but because I wanted to. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something good, something I hadn't had in a long time. I finished my coffee and went back inside, setting the mug in the sink. The apartment was small but clean, no crayon marks or juice stains, just my books on a shelf, a laptop on the desk, a couple of plants I was trying not to kill. I kept journaling, a habit that stuck after those first scribbled nights. Sometimes I wrote about work or Noel, sometimes about the hikes or the chess games I'd lost spectacularly. Other times, I wrote about Mason, wondering how he was doing, hoping he was okay. He was just a kid, caught in a storm he didn't make, and I felt for him, even now. Maybe one day, when he was older, I'd reach out, tell him the truth, not to hurt him, but to give him a piece of the story he might not get otherwise. For now, though, I left it alone, let it sit like a letter I hadn't mailed. I thought about Amanda too, but less often, and when I did, it was with a kind of distance, like remembering a movie I'd seen years ago. I didn't know where she was now, probably with her family, still spinning their version of what happened. I didn't check their Facebook posts anymore, didn't need to see their vague complaints or family first hashtags. I blocked them all, not out of spite, but because I didn't need their noise in my life. I had my own noise now, chess strategies, Noel's laugh, the crunch of gravel under my boots on a trail. I got ready for the day, pulling on a sweater and jeans, my leg moving easier than it had in months. I had work later, a full shift at the office for the first time since the fall, and I was looking forward to it, sitting at my desk, untangling code, joking with Mateo over lunch. After that, I'd meet Noel for dinner, nothing fancy, just a place with good burgers and better conversation. I grabbed my keys, locked the door, and headed out, the air crisp against my face. Back on the balcony that evening, I'd sit with another coffee, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, no chaos to interrupt it.